Quite interesting now, in 10 years' time.
Are you good? You want to count me?
Oh, so that stage, yeah, well, I'm already there at that time, 66, so I will spend the opportunity cost for 5 years.
Oh, are we live now? Okay. Good afternoon, and welcome to the Pervasive Media Studio Lunchtime Talk. These talks are live every Friday at 1 p.m, both here in the building and live online. So whether you're in Bristol or you're far away, you can join in the conversation. So my name's Martin O'Leary. I'm the studio community lead here at the Pervasive Media Studio. I'm a white man in my 40s with long hair and a beard and wearing a sort of flowy purple t-shirt today. And every Friday, we throw open the doors of the Pervasive Media Studio for Open Studio Friday. So this is where we offer you the chance to spend some time in our space by hot desking alongside our residents and staff from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. Especially big welcome to anyone who's new to the studio. Can anyone who's new to the studio put your hand up? Kat, I'm looking at you. This bit is for you. What is the Pervasive Media Studio? We're a diverse and collaborative community exploring creativity and technology, everything from comedy to coding and product development to performance art. And we're a partnership between Watershed, where we are right now, UE Bristol, University of Bristol, and we're funded by Arts Council England. And what we do is we offer studio space, including desks, meeting rooms, events and opportunities, all for free to our residents as part of a spirit of generosity and mutual exchange. And we're a space for people to take risks with embryonic ideas and to make some time for collaboration. So a few notes before we begin. Please feel free to move around. There's a kitchen back there. You can make a cup of tea or coffee, grab some water. There's milks in the fridge. We have a quiet space just next to this space, to my left, your right, just over here, just through that door around the corner. If you need to take a break at any point, you can pop in there. It's fairly well soundproofed. There's some nice sofas and things for some acceptable sofas and things. And we've got fire exits at either end of the studio. So if you hear a fire alarm, we're not expecting a drill. It's probably real. The studio team will direct you, but in any event, the fire exits are at the other end of the studio. Again, my left, your right. On either end, they are very clearly marked. And there are accessible toilets, including baby change, in the corridor over there next to the kitchen. There will be a Q&A at the end of the talk. Those of you who are watching online, please pop your questions into the YouTube chat. Loughton will be your voice in the room today. If you're in the building, please stick your hand up. We will do this the old-fashioned way, but we will bring around a microphone so that the folks at home can hear what you're saying. You can get news on all of our future talks by heading to watershed.co.uk/studio, at PM Studio UK on Twitter, at Pervasive Media Studio at mastodon.social on Mastodon, or at Pervasive Media Studio on Instagram. All right, our speaker for today, assuming he's finished prepping, is Duncan Speman. Duncan is an artist and composer and was one of the studio's founding residents way back in 2008. Today he's going to talk about some work he's been doing with the theatre company Uninvited Guests and with DEFRA, which is the UK's Department for Environment, Farming and Rural Affairs, exploring sound and the future of our freshwater systems through a series of collaborative immersive sound performances. So please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Duncan.
Hi everyone, I'm Duncan. I'm a 6-foot scrawny white male. I'm bald with a beard, glasses. I'm dressed all in black. And in case that wasn't clear enough, I'm a sound artist and composer. This is going to be a speedy talk. I'm going to, when I say speedy, like it might take a while, but it's going to go really fast. I'm going to talk through a little bit of my background. I'm going to go through some really messy philosophy, some hopeful things, some sound. We're going to listen to some things, and then I will get to the project that I'm talking about eventually, and then hopefully have time for Q&A. One thing to say is we are going to be playing some things out in the room through this surround system. So I would say if you're sitting behind the speakers when we're doing that, you might want to move to a seat inside the 4 speakers. It will be more fun for you. So, I am going to just say a little bit about my past work, just because a lot of you might not know what I made, and this current practice is actually quite a shift for me. So for a long time, I was making audio-based works, quite often for headphones in different environments, pieces that people listen to on trains, looking out the window, walking through cities. It was always looking at different ways to frame the world using sound and music, giving people not it wasn't a history tour. Actually, this one was a bit of a documentary, but essentially it was always about the present, and it was always about you listening to it, and it was about your role in that space. And the sound was a way of kind of shaping that environment. So this also involved multiple speakers in the city, some familiar faces in there carrying speakers, giving soundtracks to the city to transform it into something else. And then as I was going along, some of my concerns shifted towards environmental practice and looking at the role of kind of being somewhere and listening to it has, thinking about climate collapse. And so one of the last pieces I made was this work, Only Expansion. And this piece, rather than being just about where you are now and what you're doing and where you are, it tried to sort of take you into the future. And it did this by having microphones on the outside of the headphones. So as you walked through the city, you'd hear maybe field recordings, sound recordings from parts of the world that was undergoing climate change. And then it would start processing the sound around you. So you'd hear the real city around you, but it would start manipulating it to simulate what might happen when it floods or it burns down or any of those cheery possibilities that we might be looking forward to. And so this was interesting for me because it started me thinking about how you can sort of be in two times at once, in a way, how you can be somewhere and you can hear two places at the same time. Parallel to all this, I was also been working in collaboration with Uninvited Guests, the theatre company, since 2010, I realised, which is kind of wild, on this one project, which originally was called Give Me Back My Broken Night. And this was about making, on a base level, it was about making town planning participatory and magical. But this original version of the piece, we would take audiences on a guided tour of the future of their city, so describing what will be there, but in the present tense. They'd have a little projector, creating a little real-time map, updating it. And then at certain points, we'd ask them collaboratively to imagine what they wanted for the future of the city. And as they described it, images of that would appear on the map through magic and an artist listening in over the phone and drawing on a graphics tablet. This piece changed to augmented reality because everything eventually has to change to augmented reality. So we staged this here, and we've been continuing to develop this piece now into an actual sort of toolkit that we're using for consultancy at the moment around the Temple Quarter area and in Philwood Broadway. What's been also really important about this is this kind of collaborative process and input that the participants have. Only Expansion, you do it on your own, it's quite a lonely experience, I'd say. But these are all about futures and thinking about the future. So, there was already a talk here very recently by Stuart Candy, I'm not sure how many of you saw that, about future studies and experiential futures. So I'm not going to do a super in-depth breakdown into future studies, but I'm going to simply say it's the study of possible, probable, and maybe preferable futures. And what generally happens is it's ways where people examine trends, to compose these possible, probable futures. It's quite often, it's been historically quite often quite a text-based practice, people writing out scenarios. And more recently, and this is what Stuart's talk was talking about, there's been a shift towards experiential futures, things where you're not just reading it on a page, but you're actually in it, and it's happening around you through possibly an immersive installation or a performance. And all of these things are about trying to catalyze actions in the present. So it's about thinking about the future to catalyze actions in the present. The Quaker, Elise Balding, talks about the power of imagination, talking about we cannot achieve what we cannot imagine. Images of the future empowers and guides your action in the present. One of the challenges, or I guess the drives in future studies at the moment, there's a couple of issues. One is this move towards being experiential. The other one is about contribution and participation. A lot of these futures to date have been developed by people that look like me. And we quite often think about living in someone else's future. So we're living in futures that have been designed for us. Adrienne Marie Brown, who comes from a kind of more of a black feminist activist position, talks about imagination turning brown bombers into terrorists and white bombers into mentally ill victims. And importantly, we must imagine new worlds that transition ideologies and norms. Ooh, I'll make this bigger. Sorry about the clicking in the background. It might stop eventually if we're lucky. The other thing that's been becoming quite important in future studies is the S on futures, that it's not just thinking about the future, it's thinking about pluralism. It's thinking about trying to unpack assumptions that we might make about the future, to think about dominant and contending different views of the future. Experiential futures is about designing situations, and I think Stuart called it stuff from the future, to catalyze action in the present, to not just read about it, but to feel it, to live it, and to experience it. Stuart describes there being a gap between the... Oh, look, that's really impossible to read, isn't it? Oh, no, it isn't. That if we want to do future studies, or foresight as it's sometimes called, on a civilization scale, we've got to be able to bridge this gulf between these abstract ideas of futures and actually life as we apprehend it in the present. One example that Paul, my collaborator, always references, which I really like, as an experiential future, is Superflux's mitigation of shock. This is a design of an apartment in 2050, I think, in London, if I'm wrong, Paul. So this is an imagined apartment in the year 2050 with different growing plants. There's a nice sort of image out the window of London in 2050, but the idea is that you are in there and you are in London in 2050. So, this is futures, this is future studies, this is experiential future studies, putting you somewhere, trying to get you to think about the future, to be able to write yourself into the future, to design the future in ways that might change it. I'm interested in what sound might do in that world, because a lot of these pieces, firstly, they were text-based, now they're quite object-based. There's a lot of design fiction that happens, people designing objects, but I'm kind of interested in what sound does. So I'm going to talk to you about sound for a little bit. And this might get a bit fiddly. So, I'm going to say that when we listen to sounds, I am coming from a sort of French school of thought that says there's three ways of listening to sound: semantic, causal, and reduced listening. I'm speaking at the moment, I'm speaking in a code, which is English, and you're understanding that, hopefully. That is semantic listening. You're listening to it and you're processing the meaning of it. Oh, sorry. Oh, wrong note. This is another sound that initially you might not know what it is. You might sort of think about it being different things. You might sort of think, oh, that's like a test tone, or a sine wave. It could be flute blowing. It could be many, many different things. So we're kind of trying to think about what the cause is making that sound. Now, you know that it's coming out of speakers, so essentially the cause is it's coming out of these speakers. So we're doing a kind of causal listening there. But reduced listening is listening to the actual qualities of the sound, about what it is, the nature of the sound, and what it could be. And this sound is actually, if I reveal a little bit more of it, hold on, it's gone. It's a bell, okay? It sort of reveals itself because you hear the beginning of it and you know what's made the sound, you know what it is, but it becomes that other sound again. That rather awkward thing is called the cut bell test, where you sort of take off part of a sound to reveal different qualities of it. What I think's kind of important about this is that it says the sound has a life of its own. The sound is not just a sign pointing us to the fact that something happened. It's not just saying a bell was hit. When we listen to just that tone on its own, it has a life all of itself. And really importantly, the source of the object, the event that created it, isn't here right now. We've separated those two things. So someone hit a bell, it was recorded, and now we're listening to something else. So you have these two different things happening. You have this acoustic event, where something happened and that generated a sound in the world. And then you have what's commonly called the sound object, which is the thing you hear. And that's the moment where the sound kind of becomes a sound for you. It's where it becomes something at that point. You understand, oh, it's a bell, I recognize that. It's a voice, I recognize that. It's a sound in the distance, I recognize that. Those things are happening here, where you are, at your ears and your brain, and you're making those things happen. And what's kind of key about that for me is that bell happened somewhere and the sound got to someone that was recording it. But right now you're hearing that sound of the bell in the room and it's really here. Like the sound waves were in the room and they're hitting you and they're actually here. It's not a fictional bell just because it's recording. There's a real sound in the room of a bell. Sound is also visceral. When it's coming into the room and hitting you, it's actually going into your bodies. It's directly triggering kind of physical and emotional responses. Please don't play that sine wave anymore kind of thing, but also slight sadness that it's not playing anymore for some of you. But also when we're listening to a room, we're listening to a soundscape, we're not just listening to it. Salome Vogelin, a sound theorist, says that we do not observe but generate. We're always part of the soundscape we're listening to. So when we're hearing these sounds in the room, we're also participating in creating that soundscape. Every rustle of our jackets, our breath, our movement, they're all becoming part of that same soundscape. So we're all kind of making this together. Even when I'm playing things out the speakers, we're all sharing, we're participating, we're collaborating. So this is, for me, kind of linked to this kind of shared space, this idea of collaboratively making things together against what might be called the kind of the sort of atomization of society, the sort of individual thinking in society. But also, sound doesn't have the same kind of borders that visual work does. So we think about edges of things. We think about defining spaces and boundaries. So this is this room here. There's the event space and the maker space and the quiet space. And we're all in this room. When we look at a map or any kind of cartographic, which kind of visual designs quite often do, they lean towards edges and where things stop and start. But you couldn't really clearly say where the sounds stop and start in this space. So I can hear sounds coming outside from all these spaces. There's no sort of clear edge. I can hear the sounds outside there. And the sounds I'm making now are probably traveling out to other spaces in the building. So there's this kind of bleed where sound is also crossing borders, and it's not as restricted as visual things. And I think this is kind of interesting in terms of where we think about designs of the future. They've got edges because we're sort of looking at a picture of a fixed future and there's an edge to it, but sound doesn't have that same kind of edge. And it also reveals things that we can't see. So right now, you kind of know what else is happening in the space, even though you can't see it because you can hear what's happening. If you look at a woodland, you could hear the biodiversity in that woodland. So if you look at it, if you looked at a picture of it, you wouldn't know what was happening. But if you heard it, you might hear a different variety of insects or birds, and you might know the changes that are going on there. There's also ambiguity. So not only do we not quite know where the edges are, we quite often don't know what sounds are or where your mouse is. Oh, I thought I'd done it in the wrong order then, no. So if I play a sound like this, it's quite hard to kind of specifically say what that is. Even sounds that we might know what they are might sound quite alien. This is recordings by Jana Winderin of the Bering Strait, I think, mostly around the Bering Strait, around the Arctic Circle. And for me, this ambiguity, this kind of not quite knowing what things are, also starts questioning, for me, what's real and what's fictional. And this becomes a sort of boundary between actualness, reality, and possibility, what might be, because something might be. We quite often think about the kind of reality of sounds. People play field recordings and say, this is what it sounds like to be there, which I fundamentally disagree with. It's a recording, it's a sculpted thing in the same way that a film might be made. But what it does do, I think, is it can bring that place here. So rather than making you feel like you were there, I think it can quite often make it feel like that place is here. When you came in, I've been playing this recording, a piece by Luc Ferrari, which doesn't click like that, which sounds like a small Italian fishing village. But it's not. It was entirely constructed. There's no actual fishing village that sounds like this. It's not real, and yet we kind of listen to it and we don't sort of go, God, that sounds fictional. It's not like seeing an alien on TV or something where you think, oh, that looks crazy, or some CGI. It just feels real, but it's not. It's entirely fictional. If I play you this sound of Bristol on the quayside, and I were to introduce a Japanese market, we've now got a space that has never existed. This hasn't happened. We haven't had Bristol Quayside and a Japanese market happening at the same time. But now listening to it, we've sort of created that, or we've kind of made it possible. So I think sound leads us into this idea of creating possible worlds just through presenting things that haven't happened yet. Which brings me to kangaroos and possible worlds. I wanted to explain possible world theory today, but I really tried this week to fully understand it in a way, and I can't do it, so I'm going to do a much simpler explanation of it. The classic statement is, if kangaroos didn't have tails, they would fall over. That is called a counterfactual statement. It's a statement that describes something that isn't the case, but it could be. It's possible in a different world. By creating this contradiction, this thing that doesn't happen in our world, we open up. I'm just going to turn Bristol down. Sorry, Bristol. We open up the realm of possibility. Now, possible worlds theory suggests that there are any amount of possible worlds, and they're all valid and they're all real, because things could have happened differently and things could have turned out differently. And there's a lot of different theories around this from different forms of science, physics, philosophy. I've been kind of looking at David Lewis, who is one of the kind of key thinkers in this area. And what he said that, for me, sums it up and makes it a lot easier is so if we want the theoretical benefits that talk of possibility brings, the most straightforward way is to accept such talk as the literal truth. So I'm going with that because I'm really interested in this idea that as soon as we pose possible things, that opens up the idea that it's something else. It is possible. And then when we think about that, we're sort of, our imagination can go free. And we're not impeded anymore by the restraints of the now or the environment we're in. In literary theory, possible worlds gets used a lot. The idea that these possible worlds are created through fictions in books. But it's always done under the assumption that they're autonomous from our world, so they're totally separate from our world. And that way they can continue, and it's a different possible world. Sound, as a possible world, a soundscape, when we describe that, it's the same. It's sort of autonomous. We go, okay, that Bristol quayside and that harbour, that's an autonomous, it's a different possible fictional world. When we're listening to it, it's happening. It's happening in the room right now. It's not an abstract concept anymore. And for me, that becomes possibly a bridge between the actual and the possible, and lets us possibly start making leaps in that direction. It's like a spatial temporal wormhole to this other fictional space, because we're in it right now. We're sharing it, we're part of it, we're making that soundscape as much as we're hearing it. So, I'm actually pretty much on time. So this leads me to, what do you do with all this stuff with sound and possible worlds? Well, we've started projects related to this. Oh look, here's a picture of us. So, we've been doing, myself and Uninvited Guests have been working on a project called Future Soundings. This comes out of an earlier project. It's the same project really, isn't it? Future Soundings, just one less word. This was a project that developed partly out of Bristol and Bath Creative Cluster, that's right, isn't it, and Paul's Fellowship. And we started doing these pieces where audiences are invited to take a walk in their immediate surroundings, and especially for people online, and imagine walking into the future and to imagine a different future. And they do that by answering questions on a mobile phone, on a type form, which just asks them a series of simple questions, and then it's, can I stop that clicking? No, I don't think I can. Hold on. I'm going to put Bristol back on for a bit, because I think that might be, there you go. So it asks you to imagine walking into the future, and as you walk, it asks you to imagine moving through time. It takes you through different years, and it asks you to imagine a different place, to imagine what's changed, to pick the year that you're going to normally, so people choose which year they're imagining, and to start describing what they see, what they hear, and what's there. And then, as they're doing this, all their answers are being sent back to us, and myself and Jess are collating them all and trying to turn them into a narrative. And when the audience come back to the venue, we re-perform their stories to them, all their multiple individual stories, as a singular collective narrative with an improvised soundtrack and soundscape to try and essentially make their future imaginings real in the room around them. So, as an example, I'm going to play you a piece we did. This one is slightly different, because, and I'm playing it to you because it's shorter. Normally these performances are like 15, 20 minutes, and we've got other things to talk about. We were invited to make a piece for a project that DEFRA and Policy Lab and CABA were doing about the future of freshwater systems in the UK. And to do this, what we did was actually invite people to go for a walk on their local rivers. So we had multiple different people in different locations walking their local rivers. They sent us their descriptions, they all came together into one venue, and we re-performed, well, we played it back to them, we kind of created this one. So it's slightly different, but it essentially captures the piece better. I'm going to put this on screen for now while I play this. It's 6 minutes long, and it'll be a break from me talking for a bit, which will be good for everyone. Okay.
It is 2024. We are travelling through time. It is 2030. The world around us is changing. It is the year 2043. It's the middle of spring and the sun is surprisingly warm. You're by the River Tone, near the old oaks of the Atlantic rainforest. Rain comes, wetting the forest, lichen and fern, every branch and sandstone outcrop suitably misted. The moss has picked up some soggy heat, but the river water's still cold. Here, the river is jumpy, excited as it bubbles and builds. You see a trout, and with a dash, the dazzling blue and orange of a kingfisher pierces the crystal water. People from the nearby homes are enjoying the shade, where tree planting has taken place. Lots of families are wading upstream. Since flights became too expensive, people are relishing what they have locally. Kids jump across the sandbars. Somebody walks along the bank talking to their AI assistant, probably at work. They're a bit annoyed by the kids' noise. It's busy, like a beach in summer. In-river hydro uses biomimicry to minimise its impact, working like river plants, taking small amounts of energy from the currents. Every river is now part of the WaterNet, live monitoring of all rivers in the UK, with DEFRA's ministers held to account on a weekly cycle. It's hot. There's the hint of an intense storm brewing in the ashen sky. You're looking down on the River Avon from a new bridge wide enough for people, bikes and electric scooters which are nipping past. Moored to the grassy banks, 2 and sometimes 3 abreast are houseboats, barges, old fishing motorboats and even a makeshift pontoon. There are boat dwellers busy repairing and eking a living. Wood smoke hangs thick and blue on the Avon surface. The other side has seen the trend of development continue from 2023. Apartment blocks and retail parks dominate, which cast cool shadows across the water. Solar panels adorn the roofs of the buildings. People are on their balconies with devices, trying not to stare at the floating shanty they see below. Commuters on bikes whip past, but the whir of e-motors and pedals is still drowned out by the sounds of the retail car parks and nearby roads. Flood defences are built to minimise impact on the river's natural state. The overflow nearby provides a wetland habitat and natural protection for the city from higher than average water levels. Only perfectly clean water is returned to the river from the municipal systems. Waste products are extracted and directed for reuse before reaching a waterway. You are by the Thames. It is a Mediterranean holiday, kind of hot. As you look around, you see more and more urban developments have encroached on the natural habitat. However, due to the amount of building and increased rainfall, flooding is more regular and much of the area has been abandoned. Empty, grey towers overlook the river. Concrete is broken with green life sprouting through the cracks. The river has been left to rewild itself and claim back what was once rightfully hers. It flows much higher and faster, carrying more sediment downstream. There are individuals quietly giving thanks to the river. And in the background you can hear music from rehearsals for the upcoming River Festival. Flagpoles in the water that look like trees are continuously monitoring the water quality. At different spots, there are a few small scanners where people can connect their devices and see what's happening underneath the water, something that kids love. They can also talk to the river through an AI intermediary.
Mercury content 27%. Nitrates level. Unknown toxins 7%. Decrease of 17. Temperature 30 degrees.
You're by the River Usk. It's humid and the huge clouds are looming. The water is clear in colour and free from litter. There is much less external noise pollution as there are few cars and planes. Further upstream, the local Rivers Trust is working to restore meanders in a section that was straightened. Anyone visiting the river is here to embrace its beauty and integrate with the wildlife. There are no restrictions on how animals and nature use and access the river. Water extraction still occurs, but in smaller quantities, and it is returned clean to the environment. A father is teaching his daughter how to fish and naming the wildlife they can see. There are different species than there used to be due to the warmer climate. Bird chatter can be heard much more loudly and with more variety than before. Insects, mammals and fish that had dwindled in number can now be seen in plenty.
Clicking. So the thing that was, I guess, slightly strange about that version compared to a lot of other versions we've done is that the people contributing, a lot of them were experts. They were people who worked with the environment. They either were environmental agency people, people who worked with rivers. So the level of sort of detail and specifics they had about rivers was quite key. Normally, it can be anyone. But we made this piece as part of a project called Changing Course, which was a project that DEFRA and Policy Lab were doing, which was asking about how could the way we engage people in decision making, the very act of creating new futures about the freshwater system, be radically different. And so what they were looking at was different methods and different ideas of imagining futures that could feed into policy. Because policy is sometimes not very good at finding the experts who've actually got the lived experience of living in a catchment area, actually the inhabitants, the residents, the people there, and finding them and actually getting their thoughts is not often addressed. And transformations, true transformations in their really different futures are very hard to imagine. And the current system of developing policy for futures tends to suppress that ability to conceive of something that we haven't before materially experienced. So myself and Uninvited Guests and Paul received funding from, I've got to get this right because Paul sent it to me, the University of Bristol's Inspired Culture and Creativity Challenge area, specifically to do some experiments and some research into how you could use this kind of event as a way of feeding into policy around freshwater systems. The idea was all the things that I've kind of talked about earlier, finding ways where you can have emotional engagement with something through the music and the sound, how you can have something that's participatory, that's shared and collaborative, how you can have something that allows people to really move their imagination. And for me, quite importantly, uses sound to make that future in the room for them just after they've imagined it. So we've been doing a rather strange kind of tour from the source of the Avon to its mouth. Doing this performance in church halls. This is in Schurston near Didmarten, which is a thrilling pond, which is the official source of the Avon. More water comes from other places. And we've sort of been trying to follow the Avon and work with different communities along the way. As this was in a church in Schurston. This was participants going out for a walk to write their imaginings of their environment. including a very intrepid participant who decided to go and write his standing with a cow. Oh yes, and we did one here at the Watershed around the possible futures for the Watershed and its building. We've done sound workshops. We've been experimenting with sound workshops that were kind of looking at how we might collect sounds that somehow give signals to the future, like traces of the future in the present, and then thinking about how we could collaboratively make soundscapes, because actually in the performance at the moment, we make the soundscape. I'll come to that in a minute. People write all the text and we perform it to them, but we're kind of interested in what happens if the actual participants are then also collecting the sounds and putting that soundscape together. What's been kind of really amazing is the contrast from just along this river, going from these kind of quaint, tiny, beautiful villages at the source down to Avonmouth and the kind of industrial dockland areas and the communities that kind of consider themselves quite forgotten. And we've been trying this out, and it's been really interesting finding out what the experience has been like for people. So this is early stage research. I'd just like to say this. So this is like some short summary kind of stuff of what we've been hearing back. But to kind of group it together, one of the first things that's been really amazing is people talking about the validation that they get from hearing their voice back. So having something where they've gone outside, they've kind of looked around and gone, oh yeah, I think it should be like X or Y, and blah, 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 blah. You come back in a room and you hear that as if it were real. You hear that told as a story with other people's ideas at the same time. So people talk about this idea of it suddenly feeling like what you say and what you think is not frivolous anymore. It does really matter, and it becomes more important, and it's also shared with the other people in the room. This idea of it sort of, in that context, it sort of legitimizes them. Okay, my thoughts are serious. This is from one of the participants in the workshop. There's also this emotional impact that it has on people. Rather than just being sort of asked for a consultancy and then writing down their thoughts, one participant described it as it was important because it took you down from the intellectual, rational level into what your actual feelings about the present and the future to experience, even if you didn't write about them. So this idea that because you're in a space that's contributed by a whole group of people, you're then also experiencing what a potential shared future might look like. And it might not be like the one you imagine, but it might be a mixture of different people's ideas. The sound was amazing and totally worked sometimes, but people have described this idea of, this is one of my favourite ones. This was an elderly participant who said you could actually visualise it. It was good to visualise actually being there. So I said, freeze me now. She wanted to be cryogenically, she loved the image so much and what she imagined, she wanted to be cryogenically frozen right there so she'd be alive to witness it. And this idea that it made it real in your mind, which is like, I want it to be real in the room. And I think we're getting there. Like, it's real in your mind, but I want it to really be real in the room. So if you close your eyes, it's really happening around you. And that's just going to take a bit more work. But also, the shared vision was really important. And this was a really positive thing that came out of it. People describing, it felt like there was a shared vision that we'd all come to individually, like a latent sense of what would be a good thing, and having that. It's not very well transcribed yet. But yeah, this idea that you sort of wrote down your individual thing, but then it turned out that other people also wanted the same thing around you, and that coming together. The other thing about the shared stuff that's been really interesting, that's come up in, I think, all of them actually, I'm not sure, was this idea of actually people getting a chance to sit around and talk to each other about this stuff, just in a room. And actually these kind of, both the community centres and people in different environmental groups, they quite often just talk about things they need to deliver and things that need to be done, and they don't have that space to actually sit around and dream and think what actually could be possible. And people talked about that being really beneficial. And one participant actually saying that they'd just never been asked that question before about how would they like it to be in the future and how important that was for them. But it's not all plain sailing. So there are many issues with this piece. So one of them, as much as we have this kind of shared vision and this kind of collaborative process of bringing the ideas together, at the moment, myself and Jess are doing that. We can't, just in terms of timescale, and we can't read out all the contributions. So the process that's happening at the moment is people write all their ideas and their imaginations. They come back, Paul has a little chat with them about the experience, while me and Jess wade through an Excel document like this that we've kind of quickly pulled together and try and make a story out of it. The asking people what year it is, one method we have is we do it chronologically. So these are actually, when they've come in and people have said what year they're describing, we kind of divide it up into years. So that's the year 2039. These are all the 2050s. A lot of people in the 2050s and some later ones. And then we're trying to make a story out of it. And then I'm trying to find all the sounds very quickly. I've got better at that now, but trying to go, oh God, they want wind turbines, right, we'll get that. Okay, they want spaceships launching out somewhere. Okay. So trying to pull that together. And then we're making a lot of decisions. So we are curating this very much. I sort of think it's okay because it's not, at the moment, it's not a consultants thing. It's not a, here's all the answers and this is what everyone wants. This has two roles. It's asking people, it's giving people the space to imagine things. And then what we're looking at next is how this might become a tool within policy. So it's not at the moment this stage of like, we just need to get everything everyone says. The focus at the moment is getting people to have their imaginations kind of there. So everyone hears something that they've said. The other issue that's kind of been really interesting is getting people to actually leap into the future, to think really far into the future. And we had, I think this one. So people describing it being difficult. I could only see what was there in front of me. It made me much more aware of how it is now and how familiar that is and how it's very difficult to imagine it ever being different here. So because they're out in their environment that they know really well, they're faced with looking at that and they've got to make this sort of double imaginative leap in a way. They both have to imagine how they want the future to be different, but doing it while they're looking at it. So that's quite difficult too. And this idea of, for those who are primarily problem solvers, that's a very difficult thing to set away from. I think that should be step away from. So they're kind of talking about this idea that when you've imagined this kind of difficult or negative future, you're not suddenly thinking about how you get there. It's like, oh, what do we have to do right now? And we are interested in that. And I'll come to that in a second. But that sometimes stops people being able to make that leap further forward. We kind of... we started trying to adapt for that. So we started, when we were introducing the experience to people and telling them to go out, we started saying to them, imagine thinking about it for your generation, your children, the next generation, generations in the future. And then everyone came back in like the year 2100 and 2200 and went sort of way into the future. So we haven't quite found the balance yet. There's also the challenge of agency about who feels able to describe and write their futures. And we've had people who don't feel comfortable sort of imagining the future for a place that they don't know if they're going to be in, that might be due to their precarity of situation about whether they feel they have the ability to speak into that world. We're trying out different methods for sort of bringing agency into the piece at the beginning. Are there any other bad things? No, the rest of it's all amazing, but I'm sure there'll be some questions afterwards. I want to, sort of before I wrap up, I just want to do a couple of caveats about it. I think one thing that's quite important in terms of talking about sound is that this is not about designing the sound of the future. This is about using sound to make real your imaginings of the future. There are people designing what cars are going to sound like in the future and putting lots of effort into how are electric cars going to sound and designing those in great detail. I went to a Costa coffee machine in a university once, just once, And when you ordered it to make your coffee, it played the sound of a coffee shop out of little crappy speakers on it, of some people making coffee and all that, people making coffee in the coffee shop. And it did just make me think, oh God, the sound of the future is actually just going to be the sound of now, but bad and through little speakers. So there's people doing that. That's not what we're doing. What we are doing, or the kind of next steps, which is kind of where I sort of want to finish this up, is we are looking at how this might become an approach to policy and continuing to work with DEFRA on a policy document. We're also kind of interested in carrying on with the sound workshops and looking at how we can make those processes collaborative. And also, really importantly, not the only people doing this kind of stuff, which I think is a really important context thing. I don't want people to go away and go, wow, amazing, but they're doing this, no one else is. So I'm just going to reference a couple of other projects. Paul just sent me this one on the top left-hand corner. This is Rob Hoskins doing field recordings from the future. More outfits than us, but kind of essentially bringing sounds back from the future. Nick Knack, who's been making science fiction narrative albums. This is, I'm not going to be able to pronounce this correctly, it's Taiwanese Ru Hui Lang, working with future imagining games that use soundscapes to kind of build fictional counterfactual ideas. Astro Darien, a project by Code 9, which is about the spaceport in Unst, an island in the Hebrides, that's going to be a spaceport. That's actually happening, and he's sort of making this whole fictional album and narrative around that. And there are others, and because of this, I am trying to put together a sort of international network cohort of people working with sound and the future. And I don't have a name for it yet, and it's really frustrating because I've been sort of thinking and sort of playing with this for the last 7 or 8 months. Still don't have a good name, so I'm up for suggestions about what that union organisation might be. And that's where I'm going to stop. Yes, there you go. Thanks very much. Yes, we have 10 minutes.
Got time for 1 or 2 quick questions? Anyone got one? I will kick off if nobody does. Oh, all right. Let me grab it.
I wondered to what extent you were getting consensus in the groups of people who were describing their futures. I mean, it sounded like it was, oh, it's going to be greener, wonderful. But did you get people who were saying, you know, there's no such thing as climate change or other such things?
Yes and no. So one of the, and this is one of the challenges actually, is a big part of this project is finding the people to work with and come to the events actually. And initially, because this was about the future of rivers, the natural kind of connections we made were with people who were engaged with, some with Extinction Rebellion, some with local conservation groups. And so there is, when the group is dominated by that set, then you do sometimes get a sort of homogeneity of ideas in a way. But it's definitely not always the case. So when we've been doing this project historically in different environment situations, we've had a much more varied range of things, I would say. That I'm looking at Paul here to see if I've forgotten anything. But I feel at the moment there's a kind of, just because of the sort of finding communities to do it, there tends to be a kind of homogeneity. But also, this project has been about rivers, so we've been in environments next to the river. So in Avonmouth, they weren't specifically talking about the river. There was more variety there, but they were talking about access to the river. So yeah, that answers your question.
Thank you, Duncan, for your presentation. I actually participated in one of your immersive temple meets. It was really great.
Okay, yes.
Yes, also, yeah, I know. It's also exciting to know that policy spaces are open up to explore new methods of, engaging with futures. I'm just really curious, have you got any insights into how they are actually implementing or considering, your inputs, which are very valuable?
Ours specifically, no. I don't have it. I could not concretely say how that's happened yet, because I guess we're quite new to it, actually, and these things aren't fast. I would say there was also another talk here a bit further back by Brendan from Policy Lab, which was talking about different approaches to policy as well, and that might have a few more kind of clearer pointers around where these alternative approaches have an impact. Maybe with this change of government, maybe, who knows what could happen. But yeah, I don't know yet.
Hi, Duncan. Do you feel the need for, or do you think it's possible to have a slightly more interactive version of this? Because the soundscapes that we listen to is kind of crystallized things, and then I'm responding to it. But you talked earlier about how I could contribute, and I know in some of your earlier work you've done things in which that was possible. I just wonder if you feel that would be beneficial or even possible.
I think definitely possible.
Yeah.
The beneficial bit, I don't know, but I'm really interested to try it because it feels like, on one hand, I think there is a real value to the curated, sculpted experience because of the fact that the audience can sit back and they hear it and it's been all transformed. They've made part of it, but this grander thing has come out of their contribution. But and that's one of the things we're doing in the workshop. I'm really interested in what happens if there's no words and they're just collecting sounds and they come back and they build a soundscape together. And maybe we write a fiction around that for them, or they do the whole thing. I think all those are really interesting. I think technically I haven't quite worked out how to do it yet. We're still fiddling with this version. But yeah, I'm really keen to do that. Yeah. I think there was a hand at the back. You could build it for us. We need the well, yeah. If you can make the database faster. Sorry.
No, it's so good. I guess I was just really curious with regards to like the quality, well, not so much quality, but the people that you got involved in the project. I think it's interesting in the sense of like going towards the future, but then I still feel like it's so disconnected to the present. And when you look at communities and people within these communities, like I think sound is great. But then, I know, because you kind of said it yourself, like, how is it actually addressing social issues in terms of working with DEFRA in order to, because it's great to fantasize and think about future, but then it just still feels disconnected from reality. And I think it's just, how do you avoid also the essence of like, just the people that you're interacting with? Like, if it becomes so siloed, then is it really just, it's quite frankly, just storytelling?
Yeah. I mean, I would say yes to all of that. I would also agree that storytelling is super valuable and important for...
Not to dismiss storytelling, I think it's just in terms of...
But so, well, there's two things, I guess. One of the things is that one of the approaches that we're looking at with this is backcasting, which is an approach based around you get the transformative future. So you take that space to actually go to this really other place. And then you work backwards from that in terms of what would the policy changes need to be to get to that point, step by step in kind of incremental changes, so that you find right now what the small changes that need to be made to get to that point are. So that's one of the approaches to how it impacts policy in a way, that you kind of use this to go, okay, this is where we want to get to, because actually if we're only ever looking just here, we never get to something transformative, always kind of just fixing maybe. So I think that hopefully that's one of the approaches. I mean, in terms of the siloing, I think it's like, it feels sometimes like there's two parts to the project. There's a performance and an event that kind of works. And then there's a kind of getting that to people and getting people into it. And that's the bit that I'm terrible at, and other people are better at. And I think that's kind of okay, because I don't think everyone can do every bit. So I think this part of this is about here's a thing, but offering it out to people to put it in different contexts. I hope, anyway.
I think that's probably all we've got time for, but it's not going anywhere.
No, I'm not going.
So can everyone join me in saying thank you to Duncan? All right, before you all go, if you want to stick around in Hot Desk today, find out more about what we do, please come find one of the studio team. Studio team, give us a wave. We're here. If you're watching online, drop us a line on studio@watershed.co.uk with any questions. Thank you for being here today, and we'll see you all again next time.